it as being one of the ones who popularized the term crimes against humanity, because that term goes back to the abolitionist movement. One of those abolitionists out of Boston who did one of the first abolitionist newspaper coined that term in the 1840s in the newspaper Liberator, and the state legislature of Vermont passed legislation in the 1840s, saying slavery is a crime against humanity. So these are critical studies, earth-shattering, life-changing studies and whatnot. Then, of course, you had Du Bois. Du Bois was one of the first ones who spoke at the American Historical Association. He did a paper in 1891, on the slave trade, and then his dissertation, Suppression of the African Slave Trade in the United States of America, 1630 to 1870. Bottom line is Du Bois's book that I'm paralleling my research and document, after. Of course, I ain't stealing it and plagiarism and stuff. I'm adding some tremendous stuff to it. Du Bois's research, first of all, he was on the payroll of Harvard University and whatnot, and his professor founded the Library of Congress, which is why Du Bois had such access to the research. In appendix number A and B in his dissertation, he lists it's about the struggle to suppress slave trade in the United States. So it's called suppression of the African slave trade, the fight to suppress it, the fight to make it illegal. And he has 334 pieces of legislation, presidential messages and speeches. His appendix A and B is called a chronological conspectus. Never heard that word before. Of documents, of treaties and laws. And of course, I got 149 papal bulls. I also have, there's one of the type of bulls is called the Bull of Erection, which is when the Pope creates the archdiocese, the church. I discovered that very clearly because I sued the Archdiocese of Chicago. And they're going to come tell me that it could not be sued because it was chartered by the state of Illinois. And they're going to tell me that the Archdiocese of Chicago had no slaves. And I told the Archbishop he was lying. He was lying. And I cited the proof. He was made an archbishop by the Pope to serve at the Pope's pleasure for life. Yes, they got a charter from the state of Illinois, but that's because they were fighting among each other to steal the property. And the then archbishop had state charter the property in order to protect it. But the property was owned by the then Pope. They said that Chicago did not have any slaves, and that's not true. There were slaves in Illinois, and they, for the most part, were in southern Illinois, Cahokia, in that area, which is today East St. Louis. And undocumented. And in Louisville, Kentucky, there was a church, and the Sisters of Loretto, they 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 gave all their property to the church, but they also gave their slaves to the church because they're married to God and they ain't supposed to have no property and whatnot. So there is a monument in downtown Louisville, Kentucky, which is dedicated to Muhammad Ali, but it lists the names of all the Africans who were owned by these Sisters of Loretto and donated to the church as slaves. So that's the whole stuff. Now let me just do one or two more books. It's a total of 11. One of the books is written by the man who was head of the African Studies Association in 1969, Philip Curtin, and that's who they were protesting against, Leonard Jeffries and all these different forces and whatnot. He wrote a book called The Slave Trade of Census. And he was one of the first to use computer punch cards. He was part of the movement to computerize 40 years of slave trade academic research, but he specialized on shipping records. Because a slave ship is a ship. It's part of the maritime industry. And one of the mistakes we make is we focus on African studies and Afro-American studies and slave trade studies, but the research is in the maritime studies departments across the country and the world. And the trick is to get access to the maritime studies department. Because anyway, I'll get to that. That jumps me here. So we got Philip Curtin's books and whatnot. And one of his students was a man named David Eltis. And in 1989, or roughly around that time, Eltis sat in a library in Britain with a man named David Richardson, and they agreed to merge their research because you had different professors doing different research, and the databases were kept independent. So they agreed to launch a movement to get all these, folks with these databases and whatnot to coalesce. And that database became the Slave Voyages database. They then went to Harvard University in the late 80s, early 90s, and they hooked up with Henry Louis Gates, and Gates gave them one of the first $300,000 research grant. And they went on to found the Slave Voyages database. That database has gotten a good $10 million over the last 5 or 10 years from Mellon Foundation. They have more than 1,500 people all over the world who get online. They don't have to travel to the libraries. Online research. They have 3 or 4 independent databases which is merged with them. The slave trade database has 36,125 voyages. The ship may have more than one voyage. But bottom line, it's slave trade database, and it specializes on government documents that regulated laws, suppress the slave trade. other database in maritime laws regulate the slave trade. They had 264 variables for 36,000 voyages, and you can access that information online. And that is where I take Du Bois's information out of his dissertation. And oh, by the way, Henry Louis Gates republished, reprinted Du Bois's dissertation, I believe in 2007 or 14, because he wants to be, he the Du Bois man. He was Du Bois Institute at Harvard University until he found somebody else who had some money, big money, so the man made a donation and he changed the name from Du Bois Institute to this man. But he's still the Du Bois scholar, you know, the right-wing pro-government Du Bois scholar. And he just took control of the slave voyages. They were rotating it between Harvard and Emory and Rice and two schools out in California and UE down in Jamaica, and they had about a half a dozen to a dozen schools who were part of a consortium, putting money, rotating who would be the host for a year. Well, Gates just took control of that in February and fired everybody he could. The white man who found the 232 Africans at Georgetown who enslaved, and they sold them to get the endowment for the year. They sold them to a Louisiana sugar planter to get the endowment for Georgetown. The man who started that project and the Jesuits agreed to give over $10 million. They found descendants of the enslaved Africans. They agreed to give them scholarships and all that other stuff. They're spending $10 million, but they're controlling the money. For example, they give you a scholarship, but you must go to their school. It never leaves their network. So they're sick. They got an excuse to raise some more money from, Maryland Catholics and help Africans in Louisiana, but the money never leaves their hand. So this man helped do similar kind of things up at Harvard. He found over 200 Africans in Barbuda, or one of the Caribbean islands, and he was helping that university do the research on them and figure out how to get some money, because what Harvard got threatened. So they fired this man in February because they thought he was his position was he should help African people directly. There should be African researchers who get money to do research. He didn't say white folks can't do no research, but he said it ain't really serving its mission if there ain't some young students, African, blah, blah, blah. Gates did research on gays and wouldn't even hire a gay person. Because all he doing is trying to get his own money. And I know it. I know it, and he can't stand me, and I have contempt for him. He was aligned with Eldridge Cleaver against Kwame Ture. His mama was working in the cafeteria at Yale, and he was running in and out with part-time jobs when the Panther Parties was over in Connecticut and, at Yale and whatnot. So his mother, Knew Bunchy Carter and that whole crew. So he, it's okay, no problem. He was with Eldridge, but these people ain't telling the truth. Eldridge cussed out Kwame because Kwame said he wasn't a Marxist-Leninist. But ain't not one of them that praised the Eldridge because he cussed out Kwame because Kwame wasn't a Marxist. Okay. But then Eldridge had an epiphany. He saw God in the moon. He saw Fidel Castro in the moon. He had an epiphany. And he came back to the United States and joined the Moonies. Now, I'm not really attacking him because of it. But if he can criticize us, why can't we criticize him? If he disagreed with us, why can't we disagree with him? It's a question of honesty. So all this stuff, that's the basis of my research. And I'm sorry for taking so long. How is Harvard data? They go to the Library of Congress, they go here, they go there, they go, and they find this shipping data, which is very good. On 36,000 voyages, and they computerize it and build an online database and whatnot. They have another database which they just acquired, which is called Intra-American. When you brought from Africa by Spain to Cuba, and then they sell you in Cuba to another island someplace else, you just keep going. You might be transported to 2 or 3 countries before you really settle down and kept on one plantation. That's called the Intra-American database. And that puts 11,000 more ships into the game. So already Harvard has the database on 47,000 ships. And the owners and the captains and the crew and 12.5 million Africans who were transported through the transatlantic slave trade. And I forget the number of Africans who were transported from different islands and countries in the Americas. So all total is 47,000 voyages. And that's part of what's driving me crazier, because I have to sort that data. I have to process that data by hand. I don't know if it's statistical software, so I got to type it, and I ain't got but 3 fingers, 2 fingers on one hand and another finger on the other hand. And, they got the numerical codes. They got 264 variables for 36,000 voyages. And you can't believe the number of times I've had to retype that. Because when you're doing that stuff by hand, one mistake throws the whole piece of work off. I just did it again today. Because I use, of those 264 variables, I use 10 of them, which are key to proving the legality of the slave trade. You have at least 334 laws in Du Bois's dissertation book, that proves the illegality of those slave trades, those voyages, using legal documentation, laws, treaties. I add paper bulls. So that determines whether or not the voyages are illegal. But then you got at least 10 variables through Eltis and Gates and Harvard University, because the ship has to have certain information, certain it must certain regulations, or it's private ship or it's illegal. When you have a car, you have to have at least 3 documents, really 4. You have to have your own personal driver's license. You have to have your title, whatever, to prove that you own or rent or paying for the car. You have to put a license on the back of the car, and you have to put a sticker on the window. And if you don't have all 4 of those documents, whenever the police stop you, you're illegal. So they got 10 variables. When and where it was built, when and where it was registered, you know, is it licensed and all that kind of stuff. The shipping, you have an elevator law. There's a certificate on every elevator that says this elevator can only have capacity for X weight and X number of people. And if you over the weight and over the number of people, you're over capacity, and the elevator itself, or at least that voyage of the elevator, is illegal. Lower capacity. And the fire marshal can come in and shut it down. So I'm proving the illegality. One set of proof, illegality by paper bulls, by treaties, by laws, by regulations, and even by individuals. If Trump says it's illegal, it's illegal. Even if it's insane and if it's crazy. If Biden said it was legal and Kamala said it was legal, then people who respect them and listen to them don't question the legality. So even individuals misusing the illusion of power can declare legal or illegal. Well, I'm using 10 variables to help prove stuff is illegal, and I'm using laws and treaties and bulls and whatnot. So I have to cite them in the book. I have to show where you can get it. These are the research material that I'm using to prove my point. Slavery and the slave trade was illegal, was a crime against humanity. Have I made sense so far? How is the time going? Am I talking to myself or y'all still there?
No, you're not talking to yourself. We're still here. So
Okay.
I think that we've come to a place where maybe we can come in and ask some follow-up questions about the work that
Okay.
you're trying to do. So I have kind of a well, I have a couple questions, but I wanted to start. So you started the presentation talking about a level of what you felt like was like intellectual dishonesty. And I think you talked about your process of reading sources differently in order to be able to make this argument about the perpetual illegality, not just amorality, but also the illegality of slavery. And you said not just the transatlantic slave trade, but all forms of enslavement. So I wanted to maybe ask you to talk a little bit more about one, what do you think is at stake in terms of trying to offer a corrective for some of the dubious ways that this type of research is used, but then also want to ask a bigger question about this is a part of our this is a part of the A-APRP-GC's African Liberation Day programming. And so I also wanted to ask you to maybe talk about what you think this line of argument helps us achieve in the sort of broader Pan-Africanist movement.
Well, I mean, it's at least two things. Kwame Ture did a presentation where he talks about African history. And he talked about you really can't deal with Pan-Africanism unless you connect it to slavery and colonialism. So this is a part of Pan-African history. And we're not. We say we want total liberation and unification under scientific socialism. What are we liberating it from? The relationship of capitalism to colonialism to imperialism to slavery and the slave trade. So it is part of Pan-African history. And I'm not quite clear what we can liberate if we don't know what we are fighting and if we don't know what we are fighting for. We talk about neocolonialism, but we ain't clear on it. Carter G. Woodson, his professors were the same ones at Harvard and the same ones at American History Association. It was a small group of white college professors who would invite you to speak at a conference because it was segregation. Who would take you as a student and whatnot. They all had the same ones, not totally, but similar ones. And yet they still disagreed and whatnot. So we need to look at it. Plus, we need to know if Carter G. Woodson was right that the miseducation of the Negro. Once upon a time, we could be killed if we were trying to learn how to read and whatnot. So it wasn't miseducation, it was the murder of the Negro. For trying to educate him or herself, trying to blah, blah, blah. And there's all kind of dissertations and scholarship on who owned and controlled education in general, and in particular, look at Trump. How can you justify if his son can't get into Harvard, you shut Harvard down? He got an immigrant wife and he got an immigrant godson, Elon. I was born in Canada. And come to South Africa for a short period of time, and now he's billionaire and whatnot. But not many of them get mad with me because they give the impression we were being miseducated in the 1930s. But something happened by the 1960s. We are no longer miseducated, and that's a lie. we are still being miseducated. Our education is still controlled and being messed up, and it's even more visible today. Because Trump, you know, DEI is gone. You know, I mean, all them achievements. I mean, all of them achievements that we took 40, 50 years or more to win, don't be taken back. But now there's a contradiction. If we are still being miseducated, and there are more Africans in the educational system and in certain critical positions of authority and power and control, then who the hell is miseducating us? They don't want to talk about it. They're mad with me because I say we are still being miseducated, and you niggas are helping miseducate me. And I coldly say, I help you get your degree. Maybe not you personally, but I was one of the ones when Kwame went to UCLA in 1967 to speak, you know, at the Black Power Conference on October 22nd, 67 at UCLA. It was only 100 African students at UCLA. And those 100 students voted that Kwame should not be invited to speak. Now, that's it, right? I ain't mad with them because they didn't want Kwame to speak. But they showed their neo-colonialism because while they voted to block Kwame from speaking, they voted to let Bobby Kennedy speak. So that showed, to me, that and other things show the lack of integrity, the lack of dignity, the corruption of the college system today. Let me do one more example. There's a brother, I won't mention his name. He used to be a member of the A-APRP with Moena up in Boston in New York. He left early. He went on, you know, he got his doctor's degree. He got his wife, or he got a little posse, and they're specializing in healing. So he out there, he did their little ALD down in Atlanta on the 25th, and he's having a conversation with Akinyele, and I'll name it, who is African Studies, Afro-American Studies at Georgia State, and he's also Malcolm X grassroots movement. They were discussing Kwame and ALD recently. And, you know, the brother took both sides of the fence. He has a right, you know. I mean, he's a nice brother, you know. I haven't heard his name for decades. But Akinyele claims that Irving Davis founded the first ALD in the United States. And Akinyele claimed that. That's a lie. That's a lie. And they know that. I know Akinyele knows that. You had Africa Freedom Day founded in 58 in Accra by 59. The first Africa Freedom Day in New York was founded by George Hauser and Malcolm X. They had all kinds of activities, all kinds of stuff in 59 in New York. And from 59 through 65, it transformed itself to ALD. You had African Freedom Day and African Liberation Day in Washington under the Nation of Islam. In Chicago, the first African Freedom Day was organized by Sister Christine Johnson, who was very close to Nkrumah. Going back, she used to dance with Nkrumah in Harlem while he was a student up in Pennsylvania. And she emerged to be the first woman principal of the Nation of Islam school. She was very close to Malcolm, but she was also Communist Party traveler. And she worked with a man named Ishmael Forley, who was the head of the CP USA. He was head of Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Iowa. They jointly owned a bookstore. It is that bookstore that introduced me to Nkrumah. 64. I didn't get those books to no Pan-Af Press. Wasn't no Pan-Af Press there. I went to the bookstore to get a book on Lumumba, and by Moscow. And I was told that was the international publishers. That was the only place I could get the book. And I cut my grass. I did my little chores. I saved my little money, my little pennies for bus ticket, and to buy the book. And when I went there, I told Ishmael, I want this book. I want to buy it. He told me, I'm not going to sell it to you. You ain't heard the names I call that old man. I would spend all my money on the road on this bus all day long and go from way out there, 114th Street to 43rd Street. I had never been north of 111th Street, before, really on my own before. Got lost in 123. So then Ishmael told me, I'll give you the book on Lumumba free if you buy Email Burns on Marxism. So I told him, why don't you give me email free and let me buy Lumumba? And he said, because I want you to get accustomed to buying Marxist books. Well, long story, that encounter was 64 with me. But Sister Christine brought Nkrumah to Chicago with Ishmael in 59. And Mayor Daley gave Nkrumah the keys to the city. And they organized all kinds of celebrations of African Liberation Day with Daley's help. But you can't say Usu, Sadaki, and them forces were the first. You can't even say they were the first in 1972. Because you ignore Kwame Witsubu in the early 70s up in New York at the UN. I mean, that is research. And they ain't done it. I can only say he got one leaflet about African Liberation Day in 1970 in Georgetown, Guyana. And Irving Davis, according to him, was down there, and Owusu was down there. I don't know about Davis, but I know Owusu was down there. And so was Chico Neville, and so was Kwame today. So these people deliberately get little pieces of information and deliberately distort it, lie about it, to make a point to prove their point. He basically called World Solidarity Day next year. And he didn't say African Liberation Support Committee. He talked about that from then, and African Secretariat. And some of the information is correct, but quite a bit of it is a lie. And Akinyele can't play me because I've showed him my research. I know he knows because I've done the research. And I was supposed to present that story 2 years ago at the Asala Conference also. The truth about African Liberation Day. I wrote the first version in the party with help from the ALD task force and the 123. And after I went to jail and the leadership changed in the party, different people were elected locally and evolved and moved up. Different people wrote different versions of the truth of ALD. Wamimu wrote at least one or two. And that's good. That's good because people are learning, people are moving up and evolving. But don't come out here regurgitating old lies. So one of my projects is, you got a leaflet, I got a leaflet too. I got FBI files. What they don't admit is that government agencies also did solitary statements for ALD. Left-wing governments and right-wing governments. Nixon did Africa Freedom Day solidarity messages in '59. Kennedy did them. Moscow did them. And all you got to do is do a newspaper search. They got all these newspaper databases online, and all you got to do is type in Africa Freedom Day, type in African Liberation Day, and you will see stuff from every corner of the world. Newspaper clippings, government statements and whatnot. Now, you ain't got no obligation. I ain't got no obligation to support no shit. When AFRICOM, did Joseph's story in one of their journals, magazine, whatnot, and they even praised part of the A-APRP. Some people who they are compromised or have already compromised themselves. You don't have to praise some people. You don't have to say Nixon did it, and that one did it, and that one did it. It's perfectly okay if you do, so long as you clearly explain the difference between those two types of ALDs and those two different individuals. You have to give a dialectical materialist history of ALD to show the good and the bad. So that debate is going on right now. And I'm just overwhelmed with this one that I can't really pay no attention to that one. But you just can't believe the corruption in academia. And it just ain't. People are quiet. They don't say nothing about 53,000 Palestinian children being killed because they don't want to lose their jobs. And that's corrupt. They didn't get them jobs on their own. I worked with I did some shit. And if I help you get your degree, you know, if I help you get your job for free, then I got a right to disagree. I got a right to criticize. I'm just saying you can't really believe the lack of integrity, the lack of dignity. And if you're not accepted, you don't get funded. I don't accept the funding because I'm not owned by nobody. People make donations. If it wasn't for donations, I would not survive. What keeps me alive? But some of it got strings. And if I suspect it's got strings, or if I can prove it's got strings, then I would not be honest if I took the money and didn't admit the truth that I sold out or compromised. However little
Bob, can
I can back. Huh?
I was gonna say, can I just intervene real quickly? I just want
Yeah.
to follow up on really at some of the points that you're making now. You know, given the research you've done, et cetera, over the years, uh, and ongoing work, is there any way that people can help you, or do you need help, or that type of question in terms of moving forward with your research and whatnot?
Well, bottom line, donate small donations through Cash App. Just ink and paper. You can't believe the volume of money I spent on ink and paper. You know, I can't do no paperless office. And when you get so many pieces of paper, you need file folders and you need boxes. I'm ready to be put in the streets. I got SSI, but over half of my money goes to rent. And the other half, I get paid on the first by 2 o'clock in the morning. By 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm broke. Don't have nothing for the rest of the month. Now, I know that people say it ain't their responsibility to finance me, and it ain't. I made a mistake. You know, I worked full time for the party, low pay and no pay, and therefore I got nothing coming. Now they can say I made a mistake and I should have, you know, went to the military, and some folks have said that to me. I should do this, I should that, I should no. Somebody just called me a couple of days ago. I'll try to be nice and not mention his name. But last time I talked to him, he told me I don't have a pot to piss in and a window to throw it out of. And he was bragging about his mansion. I told him, I asked him, do you really think you're better than me? Do you really think you can get a mansion and I can't? Do you really think I don't know how you got it and I can't do the same thing? And I told him, you're right, I don't have a pocket piss in. You're right, I don't have, you know, a window to throw it out. But I do have piss. It's called a large prostate. And you better not be standing under the window when I got a piss. He
So
called me up a few days ago and says, I want to do an interview. Oh, I want to do your interview. I want to write your biography. I told him, that's nice. I don't want no biography, and I don't want you to do it. Now, because it's mine, who has the right? Who has whatever? You ain't got to do nothing. I said, yeah, thank you. If I don't do nothing, I shouldn't want nothing.
can I ask a
Because depending
question?
on some,
Can I ask a question about you said you don't want a biography, which but I do want to ask a question about like future directions of the research. So you mentioned earlier that there is parts of the work or the research that could be useful for some people in the reparations movement, but that's not really something you're concerned with. And I don't want to necessarily talk about that, but I wonder, what do you imagine either future scholars, intellectuals, but also like, Pan-Africanists, who see themselves in this struggle for Pan-African liberation. How do you imagine or want this work to be taken up? Like, what are the kinds of other avenues? What other kinds of um, intellectual or research questions are kind of opened up by this project, by refuting this notion that, or trying to prove that slavery was and always is illegal? What other kinds of questions do you think can come from this?
first of all, they don't need me. They can do the research on their own. That's number one. And they are getting, there's all kinds of people who are getting grants. I know a lot of people who are getting it, and I'm happy for them. How could I want youth to go to school and just say they cannot have no? How they gonna pay for it? If for whatever reasons I, don't have a job, how can I say everybody's got to be unemployed? How can I say everybody's going to be homeless? So they can do it on their own. And there's many people who I have helped when the story is really written. I didn't get no degree, but how many people did I help get degrees? Kweku got the honorary degree at Shaw University for Kwame, but I helped. The brother at John Hutton got the honorary PhD from Kwame at Howard, but I helped. So you can't believe the number of people that I have helped. And even when they cut my throat and sell me out, I may not help them, but I help others. So that's number one. Number two, there are people who maybe have access to money and resources and whatnot, and maybe they could help me in principled and strategic concerns. And if I believe it's, correct, I won't deny it. But if I think there's some crooked shit to come steal my shit, and most of it is, or I ain't taking no money from George Soros. It's just some money. There's all kinds of people who got Ford Foundation grants. Most African students are either on Ford Foundation, Rockefeller, or Mellon. And I can't say all of that is wrong. So maybe there is something or someone out there for me. They could change my life. They donate $2, $5, $10 to Cash App. It could change my life for the better. If they really genuinely wanted to help me, you know, there ain't gonna be no loud noise and no fanfare and whatnot. Just stay here, keep up the work. But don't keep harassing me. Don't think I'm for sale. And too many of them do. But late Zulu Shabazz called me and said he wants to write my biography. I don't have to do nothing. He'll do everything. And he'll give me some money. I go, First of all, why don't you ask me what do I want? Why do you tell me you want to do my biography? Why can't you help do a memoir? What is the difference in terms of the content and the form between an autobiography, a biography, and a memoir? Why can't you just come to me and say, what do you want? I told him, how you think you're going to pay me? Where's the legal document that restricts and controls what you will do with my shit? I don't want somebody to come tell me I'm going to take an interview and write your... That's a trick.
Bob, that's why I
Because the moment you...
I was going to say, can I intervene? We're down to about the last 5 minutes or so. Do you have any closing remarks you want to make, and then we'll begin the process of closing out?
It's very simple. We need to do research. Massive, massive, massive research, because we need to know and tell the truth. And secondly, we have to tell it. We have to create mass structures to distribute the information. Even if you write the truth and then you depend on an illegitimate structure to communicate that truth to the people, you ain't won nothing. We have to build alternative forms of education. It ain't the first time. If we can't teach it during the week, during the day, in the regular school, we teach it in the evening, we teach it on Saturday, we teach it on Sunday. Because we need information, we need education, we need the truth. So they could help me. I mean, they could just take the Cash App number, and when they're on the phone and when they get off the phone, just make a $5 donation. Just make a grant and move on. Don't make $5 and then try to control me. So yes, I need help.
Okay. All right. So
and they could help.
All right. So we have to first and foremost thank Bob for taking this time to share this presentation, the research that he's done, and some of the experiences that he's had, people he's known and know in the movement over 60 decades of struggle. We would like to thank our audience who has been with us this evening. Again, this is the All African People's Revolutionary Party, GC. If you have any interest in learning more about the party, about information that we're sharing, you can go to A-APRP-GC.org. Because of course, we are building an organization, and we always say that if this is not the organization you think you might want to contribute to, join another or build your own. And with that, I think I've said what I need to say in regards to the A-APRP-GC. If Bob has anything to share, we do have a minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and close it out.
It's very simple. I apologize because I did not have paper or the book prepared for this evening. I wanted to prep something, publish something, but I did not want to go to no white bookstores or even no Africans, because I wanted to give it to the people, especially the ones who have been supporting us, for free. And all I have to do is type it on a piece of paper and email it. We put out 175,000 emails in 2 weeks, trying to clean our mailing list. We got it down to 5,000 clean. Now, we don't know how many are on this program. We'll find out. We can get the list. But we know the 4-hour period on the 26th, over 5,000 people clicked and opened the mail. Again, we don't know how many in this program tonight, but we know that if a decent number of them gave pennies, they would help change my life for the better, and they would help us finish the project we started out. We've been doing this 60 years. We don't have 60 more to go. But we ain't giving up. Don't help.
All righty. All right. So again, Bob, we thank you. We've come to that time, and so we'll go ahead and close out our program. We'll see you all in Washington, D.C. next year at African Liberation Day, which is the 50th anniversary of the A-APRP organizing African Liberation Day, 1976 to the present. And we thank you all very much. As always, we stand ready for revolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.